Excellent. Yes, we are live on mine. Welcome to Beyond the Fundamentals and to what, dansplaining? Is that what you call
Thank
yours?
you. Yeah, dansplaining the Bible.
Yeah. So this is we're live on your channel. So I'm here at your disposal. Happy to be
Okay.
here, by the way.
All right. Well, thanks for agreeing to talk to me.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
So this okay, so the title, High Resolution Language and Low Resolution Viewers.
Yeah.
Usually a lot of times people get accused of trying to sound smart when they use words that people don't understand. People get accused of using big words. In fact, I don't know if do you know the name William F. Buckley?
Oh yeah. I was a Rush Limbaugh fan.
Okay. Well,
William F. Buckley Jr.
Yeah, I occasionally watched William F. Buckley when I was in high school.
So I'm not familiar with him as much directly. I've looked up a couple of his articles and things like that, but my main memory of him is he was constantly mentioned by Rush Limbaugh.
Okay. Well, he had a TV show called The Firing Line from 1966 to 1999. And there just happened to be one episode I was watching where he was being criticized by Michael Kinsley, who I guess was kind of a liberal version of William F. Buckley. And he was criticized for using big words.
Yeah.
And asked to respond to that accusation that he used big words to try to make himself seem smarter. And he said, it's not about big words. It's about words that carry the meaning that you're trying to convey.
Yes.
So that you don't have to use an unnecessary number of words.
Yeah, it's about precision, right?
Yeah, it's about precision.
Precision and specificity and thoroughness. Yeah.
And he said, if you hear a word that you don't understand, you can look it up, and then you know that word.
Exactly right.
Everything's fine. And he actually gave an example of the word adze, A-D-Z-E. And Michael Kinsley didn't know that word. An adze is a hand tool that's like a hand axe.
Yeah.
Except the blade, instead of being parallel to the handle, is perpendicular to the handle.
Yeah.
And so it serves a different purpose. It's used.
I'm looking at that right now.
Okay.
Online.
So there's a Cooper's adze and a wheelwright's adze. And so he brought up that word to make the point that if he was saying something and he wanted to refer to an adze, he can say adze and assume that if people don't know it, he can look it up. Or he could instead describe it by saying it's a tool that's like a hand axe, except the blade, and he said that's just tedious and wastes a lot of space and time. So it's easier to just use the word, and if people don't know it, they can look it up.
And also, so there's a couple different facets to this too. Also, sometimes at the beginning of a dialogue, you might define a word or a phrase for the sake of the dialogue at the beginning. And like this comes up a lot with the phrase church age. Like I have to define it for people. I'm like, when I use the phrase church age, I'm referring to the period of time between Acts 2 and the harpazo of 1 Thessalonians 4:17. But do you want me to say that every time to not trigger the little, heretical snowflakes out there, the heresy hunters out there? Or can we just agree that we're going to shorten that to church age, and those of us who are having this conversation know what we're talking about?
Right.
Yeah. So another thing is, like, as far as looking things up, like I read books on this little iPad here. Today, if I'm listening to a podcast or something and somebody uses a word, I'm pausing that bad boy and I'm Googling that word right then. And then I'm snapshotting that definition and adding it to my vocabulary shared album on my phone. And then I review those every now and then. And so it's so like in the past, you had to go to the shelf, get a dictionary, look up the word, or get an encyclopedia and look up the topic. And today it's so easy to look things up, but people still won't do it. And I don't get it. I don't get it.
Well, and see, I don't know how long it lasted, but there was a change in how they taught children to read. And I don't know when exactly it was, maybe back in the 80s. When I was taught to read, I was taught that if you come to a word that you don't know,
Right.
first try to uh, figure out the meaning of the word
From the
by the
context.
context,
Yeah.
and then look up the word to find the dictionary definition.
Yep.
Somewhere along the line, I think it might have been in the early 80s, the philosophy changed, and they were teaching children for a while that if they come to a word and they don't understand it, to just ignore it and just pretend it's not there. And eventually it becomes automatic. I mean, they people who are trained to read
I had never heard of this. They actually got taught this.
yes, and people who are taught to read like that, they don't even, they get to a point where they don't even see the words they don't know,
Oh, that's terrible.
which is kind of a segue into the soteriology 101 kerfuffle from last week.
Yeah, the kerfuffle.
Um,
That's a great way to say it.
yeah, so you want me to describe that a little bit, or?
Yeah, I also have your email here. I can show that if
Yeah,
you
you can
want.
you can show that while I talk about it, or
Yeah, let me do. I'm actually looking up like reading pedagogy that teaches people to ignore words. Yeah, yeah. How a flawed idea is teaching millions of kids to be poor readers. Wow. Poor readers. Yeah. So let me bring this up real quick. This email that you sent me. If you're okay with it.
yeah.
And oh, I almost hit the end button instead of the share button. That would have been bad. Yeah, so there it is there.
Yeah. So, yeah, so I'll skip the first. Well, yeah. So I guess I had was not watching your videos for a while, and I just happened to be looking at Soteriology 101, and
Yeah.
someone asked for resources for refuting Calvinism, and somebody suggested your channel, which
Yeah.
I still think is the best resource
As they should,
out there.
right?
And yeah, and then this woman, I think, I'm pretty sure it was the same woman. She jumped in and said that people should not watch your channel, and she said that you were actively promoting the teachings of Seraphim Winslow, and she
Oh,
mentioned
actively promoting.
other names that he goes by, and then said that in the video, one of the videos where you were talking to Seraphim, you said that Christianity could not help you save your marriage, and so you were looking elsewhere for wisdom. And
Right. Yeah.
that didn't sound like Kevin. So I found the
Right.
video and looked it up, and right there, not only did you clearly say it, but it was even on the screen on a slide next to you that said, you said, proposition-based Christianity could not
Right.
save your marriage.
Yeah. So my view of that whole thing when I was going through that, I view the resolution of what happened to my faith after that as a turn toward Christianity, away from semantically disambiguated dogmas and traditions of men, and actually toward Christianity. Like, I feel like now I am the Christian that I never was before, and more Christian than I ever was before.
Right. And so by filtering out the harder concepts,
Right. Proposition
people
based or proposition centric. Yeah.
people came to the opposite conclusion from what
Yeah.
you actually said.
Yeah. Because she filtered out what I said, turning it into the yeah.
Yeah, and so, and I'm not going to give a bunch of examples, but this is the kind of thing that I see a lot, where somebody clearly says one thing and somebody gets triggered by a word or a phrase, and then they claim you said the opposite of what you really said.
Well, I wonder if they're motivated before they get triggered. I wonder if they're motivated ahead of time to be against the person or the idea for some other reason. Like
I think a
maybe
lot of times that's part of it.
Like
is,
there's some kind of underlying motivation there. Like
yeah, it's
maybe,
like,
yeah,
let's watch Kevin and take careful notes so we can refute every word out of
yeah,
his
to try to find something to use against him because we already don't like him.
right.
And then that would definitely bias and influence what a person would or would not hear, or
Yeah.
what they would and would not report.
Yeah. And it's, it's hard to know for sure. I'm assuming this particular person um, thought that's what she actually heard. She did mention last week that she took careful notes, and that's absolutely what you said.
Yeah, which is not. It's strange. Like even when I was on Leighton Flowers' channel, he jokingly said, but jokingly but correctly said, when you come on my channel, everyone's going to think that I endorse everything you say, and everyone's going to think that you endorse everything I say. And so we give a disclaimer that we're just having a conversation. And one of the reasons we have a conversation is because we don't agree on everything. And I tried, and it's funny that this happened on the Soteriology 101 page because Leighton is constantly talking to people that he disagrees with, as he should. And
Hmm.
people should not automatically assume that he agrees with
Yeah.
whoever he talks to, whether it's James White or Andy Stanley or Dr. Allen or Ken Wilson or whoever else. Everybody's speaking for themselves, and you're having a conversation. And if you already agreed on everything, why would you have the conversation to start with? And so when, and I say it over and over, like I have to write these disclaimer statements, like whenever we mention books. Calvinists are real bad. Like if you ever mention the Scofield Study Bible, for example, they automatically start accusing you of believing and teaching everything Scofield believed and taught. And like it's so difficult to get away from that. So you're constantly telling people, like, if I mention a book or an author or a person or have somebody on here, we do not agree or endorse everything they say. That is up to you to separate the signal from the noise. And we just want to have a conversation because we're curious. And they cannot seem to get that, which is, I don't know if it's a decision or if it's I don't know if there's a mental thing. I don't know what the issue is in
Yeah.
every case.
Yeah. I don't know whether they just don't, I don't know, they just didn't hear that part, or they just assume that you're not telling the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you do?
Um, there are a lot of cases where I think you just have to try to. I mean, in this case, you just continue to do what you're doing, and some people will get it and try to ignore the people that don't. When you're talking one on one, it's just you kind of have to you try to point somebody in the right direction, and if they won't have any of it, then I don't know, move on.
Yeah, it reminds me, speaking of William F. Buckley and speaking of Rush Limbaugh, it reminds me that he had a policy that he would never address his critics or defend himself online. He just kept putting out the content. And the people who were interested in the content and who were being helped by it would continue to listen to it. And those who wanted to be against it, there's nothing you could say to make them happy anyway. So why take up airtime trying to defend yourself or trying to answer critics when there's nothing really you can do for them? Sorting out the facts of the matter isn't going to persuade them because they've already been exposed to the facts and they've already turned them down. So,
Yeah.
so just keep putting out the content for the people who want it. And maybe that's a good approach. Just keep putting out the stuff.
Yeah. As long as there's somebody who finds it helpful and useful,
Yeah.
just keep doing it.
Yeah. As long as they're out there, and they are out there. They are out there. They say you experience negative emotion more than you experience positive emotion. And so the feedback that I get on my channel is overwhelmingly positive, but like if you lose a $10 bill, you're going to be a lot more upset than if you find a $10, than you will be happy if you find a $10 bill. And so those little naysayers out there, it's it doesn't make me feel bad about myself, but it makes me feel discouraged about the capacity of people to be able to listen to what I'm trying to say. Like maybe they just, how much is there anybody out there who can, communicate and I don't know. I don't know what the issue is, but it's kind of discouraging to a degree, but you kind of have to let that go and set that aside.
Yeah. Well, I think I've been reading from time to time. I've read a couple of books by a man named Robert Cialdini. I don't know if you know that name.
Mm-mm.
The first book I read was called Influence. He's a psychologist who studies persuasion.
Oh yeah.
And a big part of his research involved going undercover as in sales and working at car dealerships, working at door-to-door vacuum cleaner sales.
Yeah.
Just to learn and study persuasion. And I think the takeaway I got from that is
Cialdini, like Cialdini.
It's pronounced Cialdini, Cialdini.
Yeah. I'm tracking.
Yeah. Yeah. So his two books that are really good: Influence and Persuasion.
Persuasion.
Yeah, but people are just more persuaded by, I don't know, emotions, circumstances, almost anything other than logic and reason. And it's just the way it is.
So it's like you want to have say if you're having a debate or if you're having a study, whether it's rivalrous or not, we think that the arena of stuff that we're dealing with is facts and evidence, but facts and evidence is very rarely the thing that gets people to be persuaded of the things they're persuaded of in the first place.
Yep.
So why would we not notice that and continue to ignore the things that are the factors while continuing to dabble in facts and evidence, which aren't going to persuade anybody, even though they should be persuasive? And there is a minority of people to whom the facts and evidence do work, but it's a significant minority.
Yeah, and the techniques that he describes in these books, I mean, he's very clear about the fact that they're not 100%. They don't work on everybody.
Yeah.
But if you're trying to sell vacuum cleaners door to door, they only need to work on, say, 20% of the people.
Right, in order for you to make your money.
To keep you in business, yeah.
Yeah, so, I used to sell rainbow vacuum cleaners, and we had to show, I think, 20 per week in order to make a base salary. Like if we sold 20 a week, we were guaranteed to make $50,000 a year, and that was back in 2001. Okay. And I showed my third one and got a job offer from that customer to go work at his computer learning center.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was a good thing or not.
I don't know. I couldn't decide what I wanted to do when I grew up. So I went to college and got a degree in computer science. I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do.
It was funny. It was the guy. I just happened to be one of the leads I happened to land on was the manager for the New Horizons Computer Learning Center. And I pitched him this vacuum cleaner thing. He's like, I want you to come work for me. I want you to come do this stuff. I'm like, okay. So I went and did that for a while. That was fun.
That's not the first time I've heard that happen to somebody. Where they were working door-to-door sales and the person they tried to sell something to offered them a job.
One time I was at a KFC. I used to be, when I was a pastor of a church, and then after church every Sunday, we take the family and we go to KFC on the way home, get some, chicken and mashed potatoes and the sides and stuff. And we very frequently had a bad time, like almost always got the wrong order, and they weren't very excited and they were kind of rude. Well, like for like a month, there was this one lady in the drive-thru who was super professional, always had the order right, had everything going fast, and she was like moving things around like crazy back there. And then I'm like, wow. And I was in the business of hiring and firing people as contracting positions over at Marfarez. So I'm like, if I knew what her skill set was, I would hire her to do anything. I don't care what it is. I would hire her to do anything right out of the drive-through at KFC. Because some people just stand out like that. They stand out like, hey, they can make something happen.
Yeah.
I'm reading some of these comments. So what's next?
Well, the idea, this concept of the high resolution language and low resolution viewer, could be reader, listener, is it kind of has to do with people having a certain ability to process incoming information.
Yeah.
And one of the things I see that leading to is that in general, lies that are simple, easy to remember, easy to understand, get incredible traction and have holding power, because oftentimes the truth is complex and most people get bored when you try to explain the truth, and they just assume that the lie must be true because it's just too complicated what you're trying to tell me.
Well, yeah, it's easier too. Like if I instead of actually believing the lie, if I just decide that it's true, that's a lot less work that I have to do if the lie is simpler than the complex truth.
Yep. And I have some examples that I've been compiling. One example is Republicans want dirtier air and dirtier water.
Oh, obviously. We love dirty air and dirty water.
Yeah, Barack Obama said that when he was president.
We want school kids to starve too.
Yep. So that's something that's easy to remember, easy to latch onto, when the truth is, well, Republicans and maybe just have different ideas about how to achieve clean air and clean water.
Right.
Yeah, another one is James White about a year ago said Leighton Flowers hates God's decree.
Well, it's constant. It's common for Calvinists to assign rejection of Calvinism to some kind of emotional motivation. For example, Charles Spurgeon says men detest the doctrine of election. They say, no, it has nothing to do with detesting any particular doctrine for any particular reason, other than that we happen to like what's true better than what we think is false. It's it's not a like or a hate thing or a detest thing. Yeah. Like they can't stand it. Their pride won't let this. It's not nothing to do with that.
But to just say that, oh, Leighton and Flowers and I disagree about what exactly it is that God decreed, that's kind of boring.
Yeah, that's kind of boring. No, but that's not going to be inflammatory enough to get people to be limbically hijacked and keep watching. It satisfies the time on site requirements to to get the polarizing and the polarized people to keep watching.
And if you think about it, James White believes that everything that happens because God decreed it.
Right.
And if you've ever watched his Twitter feed, he hates mask mandates and vaccine mandates, which are things that God decreed in his belief system. So who is it that really hates God's decree?
That's right. It's right back around on him. He hates the things that are decreed. That's right. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Well, these are fun. I kind of like these.
Yeah. So another one that had to just kind of break away from anything religious for a moment. Another one, this one is kind of how I got into this. And that is...
Because I got one too.
Okay.
Anyway, go ahead.
So this is the claim that the federal government does not have the constitutional authority to tax incomes.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I can I share my screen?
Just a second. The short answer is yes, but and yeah, you can share your screen.
Okay, let me give it a try here. Oh, I did the wrong. Okay.
Yeah, close out all the pictures of your victims first.
I'm not. Okay, so that did not work. I don't think.
I see a screen share that has the 16th Amendment overlaid on top of logos.
Okay, you do see that. All right, good.
Yep.
And I'm just okay. I'm just looking at the wrong screen. Okay, so this is so people read the 16th Amendment and they see that.
Yeah.
Congress shall have power to collect taxes on incomes. They go, oh, Congress didn't have that authority before. And they completely miss all of this. That it says from whatever source derived without apportionment among the several states and without regard to any census or enumeration. This is really boring because the Constitution specifically says that Congress can tax anything except a direct tax has to be distributed. The tax burden has to be distributed across the states based on the state's population.
Yeah, yeah.
So what actually happened that led to the 16th Amendment is let me open this part. So before the 16th Amendment, Congress always had power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from indirect sources without apportionment among the several states. There was a Supreme Court case in which the Supreme Court ruled that income tax on rental properties, if you made income from renting a house, that was a direct tax and Congress could not tax that. But wages they could tax. They were always had the ability to tax wages. So all the 16th Amendment did was remove any distinction from any kind of income. Congress can tax it all.
Okay.
But I've had conversations with family members who will not listen to that because they saw a video that said Congress can't tax incomes.
And that sounds it's like what they want to be true.
Right. So anyway, that's
so speaking of taxes, there's another one. Well, it's kind of like they'll say it's not fair that corporations don't pay taxes, or it's not fair that corporations get tax cuts. So this came up. I was driving, I was on in the car with my kids for 2 hours, and this came up. They had watched a video on McDonald's and how McDonald's was doing tax loopholes, and this whole trope that's out there that corporations, it's not fair for corporations to get tax cuts because they're these big old entities and we're just these little tiny people. I'm like, so I broke it down for them. I'm like, listen, what you need to understand is that corporations never ever pay taxes. They never pay taxes. The only thing a tax can be to a corporation is an operating expense. And guess what happens to operating expenses? It gets worked into the price of whatever they sell. Guess who buys what they sell? You do. So when you go to buy a $3 hamburger, now your hamburger is $4. So guess where that dollar's going, that extra dollar's going? To pay the taxes that McDonald's is getting taxed. Because guess what? They're never going to pay that tax. If they can't offload the business expense to the customer, they will close up shop and go out of business. They never pay taxes. So no matter how much of a tax is levied on them or how much of a tax is cut, if you cut the taxes on the corporation, it just means that the customer no longer has to pay it for the corporation. But if you raise the taxes, that is going to be a business expense, which gets passed down to the customer. And I don't understand why people don't get that. It's not, it's a little more complicated. And my 9-year-old and 13-year-old got it just fine, but it's a little more complicated than it's not fair that those big corporations get tax cuts. They don't get tax cuts. You get a tax raise. That's what happens. When they get taxed, you get taxed.
Well, the other thing is when people hear that corporations don't pay tax, they think that means the
Yeah, I told the
board of
kids, I said,
directors don't pay tax and the executives don't pay
right,
tax,
right.
and none of
I said,
that's
there's a sheet of
true.
paper with money on it that goes from the corporation to the government, and but that money came from you. They didn't generate that from somewhere. They're a business. Guess where their money comes from? You.
Right.
That's all. All that money came from you.
Right. And so if they raise the taxes on companies, they raise the price of everything.
They raise the price of everything. Yeah, it just adds to inflation, and it depresses the economy. I was also having to explain now, if my $30,000 truck that I am willing to buy now costs $40,000 because they're taxing the automobile manufacturer, that truck might not be worth 40,000 to me. So I'm not going to go buy it. So now somebody's not spending money, not buying a thing, and then something that was made isn't getting purchased. So that depresses the economy. It causes inflation, and it slows down economic. I mean, kids can get
Yeah.
this. If
Yeah.
that hamburger goes from $3 to $7, guess what? I'm not buying it.
Maybe it's because their brains are still moldable. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. People don't. Yeah, that thing that there's a few little apps I follow on my phone, and I shoot memes back and forth with my wife and stuff like that. And there's a lot of like leftist hate out there that makes its way into these memes, which sometimes are funny, but it's incredible how misled people are.
Yeah.
It's incredible how misled people are with what they think. It almost seems hopeless. I don't think it is, though.
Yeah. Well, so I'm sure you've heard the proverb by Erasmus.
No, which one?
Let me see if I can. It just left my head for a moment. In the kingdom of the blind, the one-eyed man is king.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I don't think that's true.
Okay.
I think in the kingdom of the blind, the one-eyed man is a threat, and that's the foundation of Marxism.
That's that. Wow, that would be the foundation of Marxism. That makes sense. You see everybody that's not like you or has anything you don't have as the enemy, as the threat. And then you have to take their stuff away.
Yep.
I was just listening to a video today where in Russia you were not allowed to say that you were hungry because the official dogma was that there was enough food. So you weren't allowed to say that you were going hungry.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and in Venezuela they solved the problem of children starving to death by making it a crime to put starvation as a cause of death.
Right, right. They couldn't put starvation. Yeah, this is in the same video that I was watching too. Couldn't put starvation as a cause of death.
Yeah.
Oh, that's crazy. Which we have this joke around here that's the same kind of thing happened with COVID, and a lot of things were getting attributed to COVID when they were obviously diabetes or even car wrecks. And so when somebody would die in a car wreck, I think Nick from Wednesday nights sent me a picture of a wrecked car because he's been working with it for a wrecking company, and he sent me a picture of a wreck, and I'm like, man, that's a terrible way to die from COVID. So that's a painful COVID death there.
Yeah.
Thriving on lies.
More on my list of lies that won't go away.
What you got? One more on your list of lies that won't go away?
Yeah. It's human DNA and chimpanzee DNA are 99% identical.
Yeah, I've heard that. And I've heard the 98% identical, 99. Yeah.
Yeah. It's not even close to being true. There was actually, I don't know how long ago it was, but the original comparison that was done, they used DNA from a bank of DNA that was highly contaminated with human DNA.
Yeah.
And they took fragments of chimpanzee DNA and put those fragments into a scaffold of human DNA.
Yeah.
and then and also the criteria for identical was 50% the same.
So
So
so if like
with
a
all those,
particular form or a ADTP or whatever it is, if a particular amino acid or whatever was 50% the same, they called it the same.
something like that. It's like they take little fragments of DNA and compare them.
Yeah.
Um, and just on the surface, since chimpanzees have 48 chromosomes and humans have 46 chromosomes, and their chromosomes are laid out completely differently.
It's like double Down syndrome.
The closest you could possibly get is 85% the same,
Mm-hmm. That's the closest you could possibly get.
and then a more scientific comparison using sources that were not contaminated with human DNA, they came up with something closer to 70%.
70%.
And the whole point of all this is that the evolutionists need chimpanzee and human DNA to be close enough that they can claim we have a common ancestor within the last X number of million years.
Yeah. So there's a causality presumption bias built into that, because you can take, I'm going to get my years wrong, so I couldn't do this. Anyway, the years that they were making Camaros and Trans Ams at the same time, you could take a Camaro and a Trans Am and you could show that they were 99% identical. I did not mean that they both evolved from a dump truck 100 million years ago.
Right.
It meant that they had a common designer. They came from a common design. And so any good designer would reuse interchangeable parts to build something else if they could. Why wouldn't you do that?
Right. And from what I've read, DNA is primarily instructions on how to build proteins.
Yeah.
And in what order to build them. And would you expect most life forms on this planet to use a lot of the same DNA, a lot of the same protein?
Carbon-based life forms making the same proteins. Yeah. That's why we can eat the other animals.
So it's really I mean, a lot of it has to do with the mindset. I mean, science is supposed to be you come up with a hypothesis and then you try to prove it false. And if you can't prove it false, then it rises to the level of a theory.
And it stands until somebody does.
Right. But with things like comparing the human and chimpanzee DNA, the purpose for that was to build, how do I say this? Was to support the preconceived idea that humans and chimpanzees have a common ancestor.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole process they used was pointing to an objective that they had determined in advance.
Right. So they decided the conclusion of the investigation before they commenced the investigation. The other word for that is prejudiced. That's what that is. It's prejudice. Right. I'm looking something up.
The more recent comparisons that have been done from what I read seem to indicate that it's actually not possible for humans and chimpanzees to have a common ancestor.
And what's the reason for that?
Because their DNA is so different.
It's so different. They couldn't have come from the same place.
Yeah. And as far as that 99 or 98% number, if you randomly took any two people on the planet and compared their DNA, they could be as much as 95%.
Yeah.
Different. Or 95% the same. Sorry, 95% the same. So as much as 5% different. So that means chimpanzees are closer to humans than other humans are to each other? It doesn't track.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I saw one complaint in the comments that we're not talking about the Bible.
Oh, you're getting those kind of complaints, huh? I should look at the comments on yours. You know, something I was looking up, speaking of the Bible, I've been trying to find this because I didn't save this, and maybe I can find it here, but When they first discovered mitochondrial DNA and it hit the news, the first articles that came out did strictly the math on the permutations of the DNA, that kind of thing. And they assessed that mitochondrial Eve lived about 6,000 years ago. And they immediately jumped all over that and corrected the calculation with the theory.
Right.
Like, no, we know that can't be true because we know, you know what? You don't know anything. When you actually did science, you got a number of 6,000 years, but then you superimpose your theory onto the science. We know, humans evolved 270,000 years ago, so we have to extend this time. They didn't know that. They believed that. That's their dogma. That's their religion. And they superimpose that on there.
And they treat it as a fact in everything they do.
Right. It's an underlying assumption.
Yeah. So I don't remember how long ago it was, but there was a paleontologist in Montana who found a Tyrannosaurus Rex bone that had
soft tissue in it.
Yeah. Soft tissue in it, intact blood vessels, and she was fired.
Yeah, he fired. How's that for science?
And then when she got a job at another university, she went back to Montana and found another one. And so in the meantime, the evolutionists decided, well, we can't keep firing her. So they just said, wow, isn't it amazing that soft tissue
can be preserved for
68 million years.
Yeah, 68 million.
And to me, that sounds preposterous.
It's so preposterous. It's so preposterous. I get people asking me all the time, are there dinosaurs in the Bible? Well, yes and no. The word dinosaur is not in the Bible because the word dinosaur wasn't invented until 1841, and it means terrible lizard. So before then, they would be calling them something else. And you had like the word thunderbirds, probably a reference to pterodactyls, things like that. And you have in the book of Job, you have, I'm looking at some other things over here. I have some books over here. In the book of Job, there's the Behemoth and the Leviathan, which exactly match descriptions of something that would look like a brontosaurus for the Behemoth. A tail like a cedar. Show me that on the hippopotamus. Got a little twig tail. Same thing for an elephant. Tail of a cedar now. A lot of things got a big belly and thick skin like a hippopotamus and an elephant, but that tail of a cedar, that's there it comes. Interestingly, not only did humans in the Bible, humans are reported to have lived not quite 1,000 years, Methuselah being the oldest at 969, and no dinosaur egg has ever been found that's bigger than a football. And so what that would mean, we're finding huge bones. And if you're starting the size of a football, you had to be growing for a long time to get that big. And so it would make sense that other creatures too, we have evidence we're living to be very, very old. And then probably something happened to do with the flood. Some people think that there were dinosaurs on Noah's Ark. But of course, Noah, being 600 years old, was smart enough not to take the biggest ones he could find. He would take babies. So, a lot of people don't realize that there are naturalistic explanations for dinosaurs being a very recent phenomenon historically, rather than this 68 million year stuff. Glen Rose, Texas, dinosaur footprints, human footprints found together in the same layer of rock, stuff like that.
Yeah,
all kinds of evidence.
I mean, the only reason they don't have any evidence that the Tyrannosaurus Rex lived 68 million years ago. They just go, well, it had to have been a long time ago, so 68 million sounds like a big number. So let's go with that.
I always wondered how that happened. Some people have done the math. So back in the 18 whatevers, when was Charles Lyell? Charles Lyell wrote a book called Uniformitarianism. When did that come out?
That was that was not wasn't he before? Darwin?
Yeah, because Darwin based his thinking on Charles Lyell's book.
Yeah.
Um, date of publication 1830. Okay, so he wrote a book in 1830 called Uniformitarianism, and that was basically uniformitarianism is everything on earth has been transforming, or whatever, it's been happening, things have been happening pretty much as we observe them today, and they always have been. And that's called uniformitarianism, and that is contrasted with a concept of catastrophism, and
Right.
which simply means catastrophes happened. Like maybe a ball of ice hit the earth, maybe a comet struck the earth, maybe there was a giant flood, maybe whatever, maybe there were earthquakes everywhere. The idea, because a catastrophe could absolutely reshape the landscape in a hurry.
Mhm.
We see this in mudslides, sinkholes. We see it all the time locally. And if you were to have something like a global flood, it would, of course, reshape all of. Well, if you want to do away with that, you just come up with something called uniformitarianism. Now, funny enough, when they put this work out, they were putting the Earth at 70,000 years old, which still the staunch Bible believers were upset about. And
Yeah.
then what's been happening, and I think Kent Hovind has a little spiel on this, where if you take 70,000 years to now, the Earth is 4.6 billion years old. It's like the Earth has been aging at 190 years a minute or something like that ever since 1830.
Yeah. Well, I talked to somebody not that long ago about who he was a preacher's kid and sort of, let me think, maybe he was a chaplain's kid. Anyway, he grew up in a religious home, and a big part of why he rejected the Bible is because he said it's scientifically impossible for three couples getting off the ark to populate the earth in only 5,000 years.
Yeah.
And it's not only not impossible, if you just let's see, where I read that article. So if you start with two people and double the population every 150 years,
Yep.
which it doubles a lot more frequently than that, but if you
Right.
start with two people, double the population every 150 years, you'd have 8.6 billion people in about 4,800 years.
Yeah. It wouldn't take long.
Yeah. So yeah, it's the power of doubling. Pretty amazing. So it's not. So I don't find it hard. I don't find that hard to believe at all.
Yeah, I'm not concerned with that at all. I've been active on this Christian versus atheist debate group, and it's been very informative for me because I've been reading Fowler's Stages of Faith, and the claim in Fowler's Stages of Faith is that the stages of faith are universal across all people. It doesn't matter what they believe. And it's whether a person considers himself to be religious or not, or atheist or agnostic, doesn't matter. They're still going through these same stages. And the atheists that are in this group are stage threes. They're both stage 2 and 3, just like the Christian fundamentalists are, who are all obeisant to their statements of faith and all that. They're and they're having disagreements over the same false image of what God is. And so I've been trying to talk to some of these guys just to see if it's possible to have a conversation, like a civil dialogue. And out of many encounters, I found like 2 who could actually have a civil dialogue and actually acknowledge some points and things like that. So that's been kind of interesting. Well, one of the big things that came up recently was like, did you know that if everybody came from Adam and Eve, that they would have had to commit incest? Like, yeah, we all know that. Is the big question, where did Cain get his wife? He married his sister. He went to the land of Nod. Adam lived 830 years and had a bunch of other sons and daughters, and you could have a lot of sons and daughters in 830 years. So in the first few generations, and even beyond that, in what we now call incest, which was not forbidden at the time, happened all the time.
Right.
It wasn't until Leviticus and Deuteronomy that incest or mating with your near kin becomes forbidden. Now, scientifically, there's a good reason for that,
Mhm.
because we all have, what do you call those things? I just forgot what when your DNA does something it's not supposed to do.
You're talking about a mutation?
Mutations. Yeah, we all have mutations, and you don't want, and almost every mutation is harmful. And so if you double up on the mutations that your sibling likely has, that's going to be even further pronounced in your offspring. So it's a good thing to avoid near kin. So it's a good scientific reason to avoid mutations. But in the first few generations, there would not be any mutations. And so it would be safer. And somebody was trying to argue that, there would be no diversity either, because everyone would be the same. Like, no, they wouldn't be the same, because right now, have you ever had, like, I have 4 kids and they're all very different. And Adam and Eve, any two people can have, if you look at the DNA, you can have 10 to the 2048 power number of diversity of different kids. Now, you'll die before you get there, but that's the amount of diversity in any two humans today, still, of the
Yeah.
number of the different kids they could have, if you could have that many. And they just, I don't know, it's like talking to a brick wall. They're just not getting it. I'm like, there was more diversity in Adam and Eve than there are in people today. And even if you want to presume evolution, you still have the diversity problem, because you're still going back to fewer ancestors than people that we have today. You still have that issue. And then there was a bottleneck at Noah, and the if you take your Ham, Shem, and Japheth, you probably had your basic 3 different major skin tones were probably representative in their spouses. It would be my guess. And then as their descendants took off, here we are. We got Asians, we got Africans, we got Japhethites, and yeah, there's so many naturalistic explanations for all these things, and they won't hear it. They think it's religion. I'm like, it's really got nothing to do with religion. You could come to these same conclusions if you didn't think there was a God, but that the Bible had some kind of historicity to it, which most of it is just recording what happened. A lot of it
Yeah,
is.
and I think behind the scenes there are a lot of atheists who are having a big problem with Darwinism, and I think that's a big part of why there's this big surge in the popularity of simulation theory.
Simulation theory, yeah.
Because if you're an atheist, you can reject Darwinism by embracing simulation theory. You can. It's also basically the same as intelligent design. People like to say intelligent design was a trick invented by creationists, but it was actually just a lot of scientists who were not Christians observing that all of life is based on an overwhelming amount of information.
Yeah, if you're genuinely scientific, you have to remain open to all the options.
Yep.
And wherever they lead.
Yep. And also simulation theory involves special creation.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you believe that some programmer or race of programmers designed this earth and designed the humans for
it might not have been a race of programmers. It might have been a few high school kids in the break room.
Yeah. So basically, I see simulation theory as
we could be the throwaway science
creationism
experiment of a bunch of rebellious teenage kids of whatever that people. Yeah. Anyway, go. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's right. No, it's young Earth creationism for atheists, because they can. I mean, all the major tenets of young Earth creation, they can accept them as long as you replace God with a programmer.
So then there's that, and then there's panspermia. Zechariah Sitchin's type stuff. The belief that there is some kind of, and all this does is remove the problem one level, but the idea that there is some kind of superior alien race out there. And essentially the story is that they either made a lesser version of themselves or mixed their DNA with ape DNA to produce a race of slaves for themselves, which would be humans. Enki and Enlil and this kind of thing plays into Gnosticism as well, which that whole thing is essentially the Matrix. The Matrix is Zecharia Sitchin's in modern generation computerized rather than analog. It's the same
Yeah.
story. It's the exact same story. The architect and the oracle are Enki and Enlil from Zecharia Sitchin's Sumerian tablet type stuff.
Yeah. I'm not familiar with that.
Oh, that's fun. I mean, I'm not endorsing it because you got to say that for the crazies out there in the comments section. I'm not endorsing it, but it's very interesting. It doesn't solve the problem of where those aliens came from because they still had to have come from somewhere. And then there's another theory that's out there, and well, this is still evolution, but it's also interesting to me. Paul Stamets is the I guess the world's leading mycologist, the study of mushrooms.
Okay.
And he proposes not, I don't know the degree of, I don't know his confidence margin in this, but he thinks that perhaps humans came about because apes kept coming across psilocybin in nature. And psilocybin has neuroplasticity qualities to it to where you can actually rewire the brain in some ways. And so 10 million years of psilocybin doses could perhaps turn apes into humans. I don't know. I don't know exactly what that line of theory is. And
Yeah.
I'm certainly not saying that I buy it, but it's interesting to me that people are thinking these things. And basically that's, to me, that's kind of an admission that straight up natural selection plus time does not get these drastic changes. There has to be an injection of something that creates or makes a significant difference somewhere.
Yeah. And I saw a video on YouTube. The channel's Veritasium. It's a physicist, does a lot of interesting videos. There was one about a very, very long running experiment with bacteria. It's been going on for decades.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how they subject the bacteria to different hostile environments and see what happens. And it's fascinating to see how often the bacteria changes to be able to adapt to whatever hostile environment they subject it to. And he said that experiment proves evolution is true, but really all it does is prove that bacteria is adaptable, because no matter how long this thing's been going on, everything that results from this experiment is still bacteria.
So yeah, so that that brings up another issue. There is a misperception about creationists. They will say, you believe God created everything 6,000 years ago just as we see it today. No, 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 no. We don't believe that at all. Whatever God created, whenever God created it, was like it was then. And all the creatures have the capacity for adaptability. And there has been, so I believe in gradual change over time. So I believe in evolution as far as it can be observed. Like you
Right.
might you might go from one kind of beetle to a different kind of beetle, or maybe alligators and crocodiles had a common ancestor, or maybe some saltwater and freshwater fish had a common ancestor that are otherwise the same, or maybe dingoes, wolves, and coyotes had a common ancestors, but it was a dog. It wasn't a hamster, a whale, or a
Yeah.
tomato, or a banana. You
Yep.
know, because I mean, think about a Great Dane and a Chihuahua. Who would come across that in nature and think it's the same animal?
Yeah.
Nobody would.
But they are genetically compatible.
Right. Yeah, you can breed them. They're genetically compatible. But it's come a long way. We've come a long way from the from the dog of the past.
Yeah.
And in a short amount of time. And yeah, I think you can have great variation. I think there's a limit to it,
Yeah.
but I
Well,
think you
what's
can have great
interesting,
variation and adaptability.
yeah. What's interesting is that most of the variation we see in dogs, for example, is the result of intentional
Right.
choices made in breeding dogs.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's not natural selection.
Right.
That's oversight
Unnatural selection.
selection, unnatural selection. Well, Jordan Peterson makes this big deal about in addition to natural selection, he makes a big deal about sexual selection, which to me seems like a kind of seems like a subcategory of natural selection. But
Yeah.
still, what is it that people find attractive and want to mate with or wind up mating with? One of the things that's interesting to me when it comes to atheists who are questioning evolution, and I don't know the degree or the direction that he goes with this, but Brett Weinstein is politically liberal, not so much anymore because he's had some life experiences now. A politically liberal evolutionary biologist who frequently says, I think Darwinian evolution is all wrong for a variety of reasons. Now, what I have not heard him give what those reasons are. Now, he
Yeah.
still seems to advocate, I don't know, basically the same or similar time spans and things like that, but different mechanisms. But I don't know what those are. But what is interesting to me about it is that he's a professing atheist and has no problem questioning the paradigm, which I think people should do. They should,
Yeah.
like, science is skepticism. That's what it is. You should always be skeptical of the findings and you want to go test it out and see for yourself. I had an air conditioner repair guy at my house today, and I have 3 air conditioner units at my house. So when I got the $600 bill to replace 2 capacitors, I wanted him to show me because I was skeptical. I wanted to make sure I wasn't getting scammed. So we went out there with the multimeter and we looked at all the volt lines and all that kind of stuff. I wanted to see it for myself. And that's science. That's demanding to be shown yourself what these claims are and don't just take somebody else's word for it. That's what science is. It's doubting what people say
Yeah.
until it can be demonstrated. I just
Right.
ran my mouth a whole bunch.
That's right. Well, yeah, that's one of the frustrating things is so many people on various subjects, they like global climate change, they just say believe science. Like, well, science is not some infallible body of knowledge. That
Right. It's not.
it's
It's a process.
it's the pursuit of knowledge.
Right. It's the process by which we pursue knowledge. So somebody said in the comments on this end, they said you could take 2 wolves and selectively breed their descendants to eventually get poodles, but you could not take the 2 poodles and breed back to get wolves. And that, because a poodle or a chihuahua, that kind of thing, it's a loss of genetic information,
Yeah.
not a gain of genetic information.
Yeah.
So you would
That's a
have
really
to
good point.
remix that genetic information back in there at some point in order to go
Yeah.
backwards.
Yeah. And I actually don't have any comments on my channel. So
You're missing out.
only watching yours. But yeah, that's an excellent point, that all of this adaptation, it kind of leads to the subject of speciation, which we've kind of already been talking about without using that word. But yeah, speciation is where you start off with a population of one species and somehow they become separated and isolated. And then over time, they mutate in different directions and adapt to different circumstances.
Or sometimes the mutation can cause the separation. Or sometimes the mutation can cause the separation.
Right.
Like there was a type of beetle that had a mutation where some of the beetles were born without wings, and they were all living on a rock face. Well, then that's where they lived. That kind of beetle that lives on rock faces. I don't know what kind that is, but the wind would come and it would blow them away, and it would only take the ones with wings, and the ones that were mutated and didn't have wings stayed behind and started their own wingless species of beetles.
Right. And then over time,
but they're still beetles.
Even though the original population could interbreed,
and it's less information.
Yeah.
Now they lost the genetic information for wings.
Yeah. So you end up with 2 different populations that can no longer interbreed, and it's because of the loss of genetic information.
Right. Because of the loss. And so, and also with the word species, sometimes you have to educate the atheist on that word too, because scientists can't even agree on what a species is for sure. What's the
Right.
dividing line between when the difference is a species or a genus kind of thing? And that whole kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species thing, people try to read that back into the Bible. They're like, you telling me that Noah got all the species of all the animals on the Bible doesn't say species. Species isn't a word being used until Carlos Linnaeus comes along in 1729. The
Right.
Bible uses the word kinds, kinds. So you didn't need a wolf and a dog and a coyote. You needed a generic dog or wolf, whatever it was. You only needed one kind of that animal. And all the other varieties that we have came from that pair that was on the ark. So the Bible spoke in kinds. The word species is a later variety that we use.
Yeah. And that kind of genetic differentiation and separation can happen in a very short period of time. It doesn't require millions of years. It can happen in just a few generations.
Yeah, Roberta said it's a man-made classification system that's argued about all the time. Yeah, all it is an attempt to classify what we see. There's no animal out there that understands its own taxonomy and is making sure they follow it and obey it.
Yeah.
They're not doing that. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
And yeah, atheists think that they think that we're cynical of evolution because of a religious thing. I'm actually not. I really am not. I try to be open and willing to follow the evidence wherever it leads. And evolution theory is just a bridge too far on so many things. There's so many reasons in the solar system and on planet Earth that those time spans can't exist. So many reasons.
Yeah, I used to be dogmatically young Earth creationist based on Genesis chapter 1. And as I've gotten older and read a lot more, I've kind of come to the conclusion that I could, under the right circumstances, be persuaded that Genesis chapter 1 and 2 might be figurative.
Yeah.
But so far, I'm not aware of any scientific reason why I should accept Darwinism.
Right. I think about that too. And what's really interesting to me is to listen to someone like Jordan Peterson talk about the Bible from a psychological standpoint. He did a lecture on Genesis. And so I don't think that we're going to have any shortage of meaning if it turns out that the literal perspective people have winds up not being the ontology in which we live. It's not going to give me any heartburn. I really don't care. But I do find that certain things, like we've been told for years and years and years, that all the layers represent different ages. Well, that can't possibly be true for a number of reasons. There's no erosion between the layers. And there's fossils all in the layers, the geologic column, as they call it. There's fossils all in there. In order for something to fossilize, it has to be buried quickly before it can rot and before something eats it. If something dies today out on the surface of the land out here in my front yard, it doesn't sit there in perfectly good tact waiting 7 million years for the next layer to form over on top of it. It doesn't sit there. It rots, or something eats it, or something like that. In order to get a fossil, it has to be buried rapidly before it can rot or be eaten. You have Polystrata fossils, which is multiple layered fossils, one tree going through multiple layers. That tree did not grow through those layers for billions of years. Those layers formed around that tree. And, you look at Grand Canyon, that's supposedly, millions and millions of years old, carved out slowly by the Colorado River, where even the evolutionists don't believe that anymore. Even the paleontologists and geologists don't believe that anymore. And they're now admitting that it is a washed out spillway. And one of the things that helped them see that was the aftermath of the 1980 Mount St. Helens eruption. Spirit Lake, the aftermath of that eruption caused a 1/6 scale canyon, all the water running off, that was like Grand Canyon, but about a sixth of the size, complete with layers, Polystrata fossils, and fossils in the layers, with no erosion between the layers, just like we see at Grand Canyon. And we watched it form in 6 weeks in 1980, watched it form. And then by the 1990s, there were completely petrified tree logs in the bottom of Spirit Lake, Polystrata fossils going through multiple layers of mud and rock. So we see everything happen in just 6 weeks. We can see how the Grand Canyon could have happened very fast, and probably it had to have, actually. And then we see things petrifying. They tell you petrification takes millions and millions of years. We see it happen oftentimes in less than a decade, and that's looking at it with our eyeballs. It's not a religious belief. It's empiricism. So why am I going to inject a theory that is completely useless and completely unnecessary on top of the natural world that we see, rather than let the evidence lead the way, which is what science should do?
And I think, based on a lot of what you just said, when we find dinosaur bones in Western North America that have not fossilized, they're still bones.
Yeah, still bones, still soft tissue in them.
Still have soft tissue. Doesn't it seem more reasonable to think they haven't been dead very long?
Right. But that's just preposterous.
Instead of going, wow, blood cells can hang around for tens of billions of years.
So that, this kind of gets to, I was listening to Ian McGilchrist talk about the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, and the left hemisphere tries to make a model of everything, and the right hemisphere is what allows you to be open to new information, new spaces, or danger, or things like that. It can see the gestalt, while the left hemisphere has organized all the components, that kind of thing. And so when you when he noticed that, like, when patients have a stroke in the right hemisphere, their left hemisphere takes over, and they will completely deny that their left side of their body exists at all or ever did. And so what they find through things like this is they find that the left hemisphere is very good at denial of obvious and plain facts that are obvious to anybody else. One of the reasons you need both hemispheres to be functioning in your head. And when you have an entire society that is built on mistaking the map for the terrain, and in this case, evolution theory is the map, the evidence in the world is the terrain, and evolutionists have them confused. They have them backwards. They've confused the map for the terrain, and they're in complete denial whenever there is evidence to show that the theory is not correct. It's supposed to be a hypothesis and a theory until it's proven wrong. How much proof do you need? How much soft tissue in dinosaur bones do we need to find until somebody says, okay, maybe 68 million years was a bad guess?
Yeah. And I read that Louis Pasteur did a lot of the things he studied in the late 1800s was because Darwinism depends on spontaneous generation. And Louis Pasteur was trying to disprove spontaneous generation.
Yeah.
So, for example, he studied the fermentation process that produces wine. And he's the one that identified that it was actually a microscopic organism that was eating carbohydrates and then giving off carbon dioxide and alcohol, when previously the belief was that you just leave fruit juice out and it spontaneously turns into alcohol.
Spontaneously, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun. It's interesting what them facts will do. What somebody said, spontaneous generation goes all the way back to like the Greeks about 400 BC when they thought that swamps spontaneously produced crocodiles.
Yeah, maybe.
And to me, evolution is just as inane as that and flat earth. It is evolution theory is the new Dark Ages Catholic Church dogma of the current era.
Interesting you should mention that. This is an idea I'd completely forgotten about, but I was taught as a kid that Galileo was punished by the Catholic Church because the Bible teaches a geocentric universe, and the Catholic Church was very determined they had to protect that, and so they punished Galileo. But that isn't what happened.
That's exactly not what happened.
What actually happened was the scientific consensus of the day, going all the way back to Plato, was that the Earth was the center of the universe. Yep. And Galileo was challenging the scientific consensus. And it just so happens that a lot of the people who were in the scientific community were math professors who were Jesuits.
Yep.
And it was actually the Jesuit math professors who put pressure on the Pope to silence Galileo because he was contradicting the scientific consensus.
Scientific dogma.
Yep.
It's funny how it be like that. So that's another example of an easy lie versus a more complicated truth.
Yep. You may be aware of this. I don't know, but you're familiar with Michael Crichton, who was a science fiction writer.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, if you Google Michael Crichton and scientific consensus, if you're not familiar with this article, he wrote an excellent article.
Yeah, I think I've heard of this.
Not sure how long before he died, but it was about how completely illegitimate scientific consensus is. And I think in that article he mentioned that I guess there was a book published in Einstein's day that was called something like 100 Scientists Disagree with Albert Einstein. And somebody asked Einstein what he thought about that book. And he said, if I was wrong, they would only need one author.
Yeah, that's right. Right in the middle of this article, it says, let's be clear. The work of science has nothing whatever to do with consensus. Consensus is the business of politics. Science, on the contrary, requires only one investigator who happens to be right, which means that he or she has results that are verifiable by reference to the real world. In science, consensus is irrelevant. What is relevant is reproducible results. The greatest scientists in history are always great precisely because they broke with the consensus. There's no such thing as consensus science. If it's consensus, it isn't science. If it's science, it isn't consensus, period.
Yeah.
Whenever you produce, so what if you ever one of the, I don't know if you call this a mistake, but if you're ever debating an atheist and you start to name qualified scientists who happen to be creationists, what they will answer with is they're like, no matter how many names you give me, I can produce for you a list of atheistic scientists named Steve that outnumbers your list.
Yeah.
And they're all named Steve. It's the Steve list floating around out there.
Yeah. Somebody in the comments, Molly's Donut Shop, mentioned flat Earth and arguing with flat Earth people. A few years ago, when I found out there was I live near Denver, and when I found out there was a flat Earth, the annual Flat Earth Conference was being held in Denver, my reaction to that was, are there really enough people who believe the Earth is flat to have an annual convention?
Yeah, so they come to it from all over the globe.
Yeah, I started reading everything I could find about it. I think my wife and my daughter were afraid I was going to become a flat earther. But I was fascinated. I was fascinated by their arguments, partially because I saw a strong similarity to arguments in defense of Calvinism. I haven't quite exactly put my finger on what it is, but it feels, I don't know, it feels so similar.
Yeah, it does. I have a meme that I saw today. I'm actually trying to figure out how to get it onto the screen. Um, Let me see if I can do this. I'm going to pause this and back it up. And now I'm going to see if I can share my screen where you can see this. You see that? Flat
Yeah.
earthers, when they see a roundabout, not a flat about. I laughed my head off at that a whole bunch of times and probably should not have.
Yeah.
I guess I wonder if when flat earthers look up in a telescope if they see a bunch of discs out there instead of planets.
Yeah, I don't know. I remember when I don't remember how old I was, maybe junior high school. My brother had gone off to college and he had a old telescope, and I'd heard something about Jupiter was visible at a particular time of night. And so I took it outside, and with my brother's cheap telescope, I was able to see Jupiter, and I think I counted, I can't remember whether it was 7 or 12. I could see the moons, and I could see in the telescope they were spherical.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Unless the discs all have to be facing you at the same time.
well, that's true. I guess it could have been an optical
I mean, they
illusion.
probably knew you were looking, and when they know you're looking, they do camera tricks, to
It
give
is
it that oval
fast.
look.
It is fascinating how many of their arguments kind of make sense up to a point.
Yeah,
Um, but the thing, there are a couple of things that stop me. One is if the sun is basically a floodlight that's on a track, which I
yeah,
think they believe, why is there ever night anywhere on Earth? That doesn't, I don't understand that.
yeah. You ought to have direct line of sight to it all the time.
Because, like, yeah, maybe during parts of the day it gets really small and
Shows
dim,
you that, yeah, it's just so
but
far away.
but it's still far above. Why does it disappear behind the horizon?
I,
I don't know.
I told one time, I told a flat earther, I said, look, when I was deployed to Iraq, and I don't know if I'm supposed to say this in public, but I would I would watch the drone flights, and they would be very high altitude drone flights, and they would conduct strikes sometimes. And I'll sit around, and if you have a very high altitude drone flight, it's high enough sometimes where you can see the curvature of the earth, which is kind of cool. And I'm
Yeah,
like, yeah, it's like it's a classified feed. We're watching it on Cypernet, and you can see the curvature of the earth right there. And they're like, nope, nope, they're doing that as a trick to trick you. they they have these lenses that make it look oval. So like they have these lenses that only affect the horizon and nothing else.
yeah,
Doesn't affect the curvature of the Jeep or the building that you're looking at. It just affects the horizon. That's impressive there. That's
yeah.
impressive to have a lens like that. I
I
want to know
yeah
where they get
years
that
ago,
lens.
years ago I saw a video of a guy who was doing repair on a radio tower, and so
Hmm.
he had to climb this tower, and I think it was 1,700 feet.
Yeah.
And there was actually a section of the tower where there was no place for him to attach his harness. So he was actually free climbing without a harness for
Oh,
something like 10 feet.
that makes me feel ill.
Uh, but even on that tower, you could see the curvature of the earth.
So I live in Baton Rouge. I just moved from New Orleans in 2020 after I got married, and Lake Pontchartrain has power light poles that go along the road on Lake Pontchartrain, right? And it's just a lake. You're just driving 25 minutes from across the lake from New Orleans to Covington. Well, when they measure the parallelism of the light poles. The light poles, because of the curvature of the earth, they are centered, they are built with a level. Well, when you measure the distance between them, they are slightly not parallel to each other, kind of like spokes on a wheel,
Right.
even in just that short amount of time, a short amount of space.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Still has to be some kind of trick.
So my big thing is, how do we, well, I think Jordan Peterson had a really good point that even though the Bible does occur in a historic context, I don't I don't think that it's the Bible's point to try to give you a physical ontology of what the world is. It's just giving you a narrative that happens to take place in the world. And when it's giving a description, it's not trying to be dogmatic about the ontology within that description. It's just trying to let you know what's going on.
Right.
And I think there's some value to that. People speak phenomenologically. Today, we even say the sunrise and the sunset. Well, the sun's not rising, the sun's not setting, we're spinning, but we still say that. So I don't have a problem with phenomenological language if it sounds like, if they talk about the four corners of the earth. I saw a advertisement for the Marine Corps in the post office that said defending the four corners of the earth. Does the Marine Corps think the world is flat? It's just a figure of speech. We still use it today.
Right.
Somebody, hey, what do you think about the gap theory? Somebody put that in the comments section. Is that a bridge too far for today?
Well, I guess it would depend on what exactly people mean by the gap theory.
Yeah, there are a couple different flavors of it.
Because I thought, okay, for example,
there's a Hugh Ross gap theory, and then there's a Ruckman gap theory.
Yeah. Well, when I look at Genesis chapter 1, I see there could be some indeterminate period of time between the time God created the heavens and the earth and the time he said, let there be light. But when I said that in some independent fundamental Baptist discussion forum, they informed me that the gap theory means that before God said, let there be light, there was a completely other creation in which the dinosaurs existed and there was death, and it's where Satan fell and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, I don't know about that.
I think there's two different kinds of gap theorists. There are the kind that are remedial enough to fall for evolution and they think it's scientific, which it isn't, and they're trying to find a place to cram the millions and billions of years. There's that kind of gap theory person. And people who are motivated by that nonsense will either go to the gap theory or the day age theory. And they're trying to find some place to put those millions and billions of years. Well, the other kind of gap theorist, for example, Peter Ruckman, and Michael Pearl here is mentioned in the comments section, and I don't know this for sure, but I think that Pearl and Ruckman see eye to eye on this, but I could be wrong on that. So, but Ruckman is a very much a young Earth creationist apologist and has all kinds of audio tapes and books on refuting evolution. But his mechanism for the gap isn't so much as a place to cram time as it is an explanation for why when Adam and Eve show up, there are already the devil has already fallen. There's already angels. There's already been some kind of war in heaven where a third of them got kicked out. There's this whole thing where the devil and his angels, a pre-Adamite civilization. So all this stuff happened according to their version of the gap theory, but they're not using it as a mechanism to sweep 4.6 billion years under the rug.
Right.
I don't see a reason to subscribe to either one. But I think they're interesting.
Well, and see, I guess the way I understand Genesis,
somebody mentioned Missler, I think Larkin too. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Genesis 1:1, where it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." A lot of people assume that the word heavens refers to heaven,
Yeah.
and I'm not sure. I'm not sure it does. I think it's more likely to refer to everything that's part of our physical universe that's not Earth,
Okay.
like uh, the sky and space
Right.
and
Right.
planets and all that stuff. That's what I think it probably means by the heavens.
Yeah.
So,
To me, I take it phenomenologically as somebody standing on the way they would use the phrase "the heavens." Somebody
yeah,
standing on Earth looking up. That's the heavens. I have my immediate atmosphere, then I have outer space. That kind of thing.
yeah. So I don't think Genesis chapter 1 tells us anything at all about the creation of heaven or angels or any of that.
Oh
That's
my goodness.
that maybe that's just me.
Well, I saw a comment. I don't know if Elizabeth in the comment section is joking or not.
Uh, which comment? I mean, I see Elizabeth.
Um,
I see you're saying ACOG believes gap theory. I don't know who ACOG is.
well, I Googled ACOG, and
Okay.
when I Google it, um, it is the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists. So I
Okay.
don't know if she's joking or not.
Oh, it could be sound. I mean, with that information, it sounds like it was probably a joke. But
Like a joke, because there's this thing called thigh gap where I can't believe
okay, maybe
Elizabeth.
we
What
should
have you
pretend
gotten
we
us
didn't see
into?
that.
What's that?
Maybe we should pretend we didn't see that.
Or maybe we need an illustration. Oh, it's a branch of the Church of God.
Oh,
Um,
okay, okay. Apostolic Church of
this
God.
was about to get really interesting.
Okay, so it's probably the Apostolic Church of God. Maybe.
I'm kind of disappointed now. I really wanted
Oh,
it to
just
be the medical thing.
Apostolic Church of God. ACO. Yep, the Apostolic Church of God. It's interesting. There's so many different groups within Christendom that I probably haven't even heard of most of them.
So were they founded by the medical people?
Yeah, there's no telling.
And we're gonna have to have a rule from now on. If you're going to use an acronym, you're gonna have to spell it out at least once.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're gonna get too interesting.
Well, I wanted to describe my beliefs as Campbellism, but I can't do that because
Because there's
somebody.
already Campbellites.
Yeah.
That's Church of Christ, not the Church of God.
Yeah.
They probably have their own medical group too.
Probably.
It's a submarine medical group.
Yeah.
Some people will get that. People in the Lord's Navy will get that.
Yeah. I went to a Church of Christ for about a year when I lived in North Carolina.
How was that? Were you one of them, or
Well, no. I grew up going primarily to Baptist churches, and when I moved to North Carolina after college because that's where I got a job, and this another man started on the same day, and he said at his church he had there were a group of singles and they were meeting at the pastor's house Sunday night to sing hymns, and he invited me to go.
yeah?
So I went, and I enjoyed the hymn singing a cappella. And so anyway, I kept going and I kept going, and it took me probably about 7 or 8 months to figure out just how much what they believed was different from what I believed.
So you hadn't heard them before that?
I had not heard of them before. I was
Yeah.
not familiar with the Church of Christ. And so by the time I figured out just how much we were different, they were they were my they were my friends. I hung out with the singles on the weekends. So it took me a while to separate from that, just because I had to start over. I'd been in North Carolina for a year,
Yeah.
and I had to start over with all new friends. One of the things that made it a little bit easier was 3 of the guys in the group were either got married or were engaged, and so they had less time for me to begin with. So that made it a little bit easier. But yeah, so that was an interesting experience.
I found I kind of got I had a little thing with the Church of Christ one time, and I found that their music was amazing. So I knew that Independent Baptists, they preach against everybody. So I knew about Church of Christ before I ever encountered them. But also as an Independent Baptist in Tampa, Florida, we were listening to this group called Acapella. Well, Acapella is without musical instruments. So don't you know that the Church of Christ is going to eat that up because they don't use musical instruments.
Yeah.
So, and of course, Keith Lancaster is Church of Christ. So I didn't find that out till I got a little bit older. But I just happenstance, I was home from college one day during the summer, and I was playing basketball outside, and there was these other 3 kids out there my age, and they were singing these a cappella songs that I'd known since I was a kid. And I'm like, whoa, you know those same songs? And I wound up like leaving and going on this weekend trip to this Church of Christ youth conference thing where there's thousands of people there. And I had a lot of fun. It was great. I had a lot of fun. I didn't get all mixed up in it and stuff. It was like that weekend, and it was that was it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was a lot of fun. I thought I was blown away by the music, by how like everybody could sing and everybody would sing. And it was good. I would go back just for that.
Yeah.
I would even let them baptize me if I could hear that again.
I love the music. And actually, so it's kind of interesting because I did let them baptize me. Mm-hmm. I got to the point where I decided that I never really understood why I got baptized when I did as a teenager.
Yeah.
And so I decided I needed to be baptized again. So I let them baptize me. And I guess I didn't really make it clear to them that I didn't completely agree with their view of baptism. But yeah, it was interesting when I told the pastor, I was not prepared for this. When I told the pastor, I want to get baptized, he went and turned on the water in the baptistry.
Oh yeah. You don't want you dying and going to hell without.
It was like,
you get that stuff knocked out quick.
So we're going to do it right now. Okay. So, and when I left the church, one of the friends that I was in the singles group with called me to tell me that I was going to hell.
Oh yeah.
So, and there was another Church of Christ like a half a mile away. There was another Church of Christ about a half a mile away, and they would not associate with one another.
Oh yeah, they're all going to hell too.
Because the other Church of Christ had a kitchen.
Oh no.
Yep. They know nobody ever had a kitchen. The church didn't have a kitchen in the book of Acts. It's like, okay. Well, you're told to, yeah. So one of the things they said was like, if the church was going to collect money to send to another church that was in financial trouble,
yeah,
that the only way that was allowed to be done is they had to collect the cash, and then somebody had to physically carry the money to the other church, because that's the way Paul did it. And I actually said to one of the guys when I left, because I said, when I read the New Testament, I see that God wants his people to be generous,
Yeah.
And you see a bunch of rules that make it so we can't be
So
generous.
this is what, Adrian came up with the phrase methodologically possessed.
Yeah.
So we have ideologically possessed. They're methodologically possessed. You must do it this way. It's
Yeah.
the same thing. It's ideological possession at the procedural level.
Yeah. So it's
It's just
interesting.
so funny to me what people separate over. I can't even get over it.
Yeah, I don't know.
Somebody saying, "Oh, these guys aren't taking baptism very seriously." Well, it's another thing that Fowler mentions in his book Stages of Faith is that people in stage 3, they're unable to separate the symbol from the sacred thing that it represents, and they confuse the two. They think the symbol is the sacred thing that it represents, and they confuse the two things. And so when it comes to baptisms, the Lord's Supper, or if you're a Catholic, a crucifix or the wafer, or the doing the little sign of the cross, all that stuff, those are symbols. And in stage 3, people confuse the symbol for the sacred thing they point to. And then in stage 4, you break that connection. And then in stage 5, you reassemble that connection, but now with a greater appreciation of how it all works. You still don't confuse the thing for it, but you
Right.
see the beauty in it, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. The last Baptist church where I was a member for 10 years, the pastor who was there, he would only allow us to do communion once a year. And it was on what he believed was the anniversary of when Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper. And I ended up
And this was what kind of
deciding
church? The Church Christ?
it was an independent fundamental Baptist church.
Okay. See, this is interesting to me because I thought about this because the Lord's Supper is a Passover thing, and I've thought about, like, I would never be dogmatic about it,
Right.
but it seems right to me to do it when you would do Passover, which is once a year. So this is
Yeah.
interesting to me. I mean,
Yeah, to me, actually ended up making it. Most years what happened was I got called to some catastrophe at work and couldn't go.
yeah,
And then the one time I did go, my assessment of the way he did it was such that I never went again because
yeah,
I felt
yeah,
like instead of commemorating Christ's death, we were commemorating the institution of the Lord's Supper.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it just, I don't know. And then when he decided he was leaving, everybody in the church, the one thing everybody agreed on was we wanted to do communion a lot more often than once a year. And so when we finally got a new pastor, I realized he'd been there like 8 months and we hadn't done communion. And I tried to talk to him about it. And basically what ended up happening was I brought up the verses in Corinthians about communion to try to talk to him about them. And he cut me off and said, Baptist tradition has always been this way. Which, if you know anything about Baptists, and I know you do, there's no such thing as one Baptist
That's
tradition.
exactly right.
Way.
Baptist tradition is to fight about the stuff. That's the only tradition they've always had.
Yep. So, yeah, that was when I decided I was gone.
What about Dort? Do you know anything? I'm trying to see what some of these comments are about. Somebody figured out Jesus' birthday. It said September 11th, 3 BC, but they're heretics. It was September 23rd. Anybody would know that. I'm joking, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you know how churches settle disputes?
I don't know if this is a trick question or not. You giving me anxiety.
Yeah.
I guess not. Say again.
With cannons.
Oh yeah. That's right. that's that's hilarious. And it's hard to tell which kind of canon is more harmful.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Somebody said they got saved. Church of Christ. You're not saved. Okay. 6 years old. I didn't get saved until 29. Had some sinning to do first. Well, I did mine backwards. I got saved and then I had all my sin to do afterwards. I'm just kidding there too. Trying to get a rise out of people. That's kind of fun. Yeah, I have all these books over here about the creationist evolutionist thing that I really just kind of have them to spawn my memory of the different things there are, because I don't dabble in this issue a lot, because
Yeah.
I think it becomes not, I mean, I think it's interesting and I like it, I enjoy it, but I think it becomes, people still get propositionally entrapped, and they think it's about having all the right propositions about this thing, and they're not encountering scripture as a means of facilitating their own transformation. They're trying to semantically disambiguate all the things, and
Yeah.
that's not what it's for.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of think its main purpose is to give us God's perspective.
Well, so it's like a perspectival, knowing type of thing then.
Yeah. And you know, I mean, when people, okay, you brought up you've a number of times over the last couple of weeks, you brought up the comment from somebody who said they don't need 4 kinds of knowing.
Yeah,
However they said it, but
I got that somewhere over
you
here.
can't. Everybody uses the 4 kinds of knowing all the time in various areas of their life. I mean, you can't drive a car without all 4 kinds of knowing.
Exactly. I don't need the 4 kinds of know something. If God said it, well, then you can't drive a car, buddy.
Yeah, I mean, I
You
think,
can't throw a baseball.
and it took me a long time to understand what you were talking about perspectival knowing, quite frankly. I think it was when you talked to John Vervaeke that I finally got it.
Yeah, his work is really good on that kind of stuff. And it's I figured it was just easier to go, because me and Nick were going to do a video on the 4 kinds of knowing, and I'm like, you know what? Just for, kicks and giggles, let's just email John Vervaeke and see if he'll come on and talk about it himself. And he did.
Yeah, because I think he explained it really well.
Yeah, which is great. All right, what else we got? We about ready to wrap it up?
I think we might be. We're getting pretty close to 2 hours. Almost hit 2 hours.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna juice. It's kind of late for me here.
Yeah, I think I hit most of the topics that I thought were possibilities to talk about.
Yeah, I like this conversation, because it's kind of feels it's not hugely fast paced. We just kind of hit these things as they come, and it's kind of nice. I would like to do this again. This would be fun.
Sure. I think that would be fun also.
Oh, sounds good. And yeah, this has been a pleasure. So I guess this is I think this is your first time on here other than on Wednesday nights. And this is how many videos do you have on your channel?
Well, including the ones where I just read Philippians, I think I have a total of 10.
Okay. So for everyone watching from my channel, tell them where they can find you.
They can find me on YouTube by looking up Dan-splaining the Bible.
Dan-splaining the Bible.
Because if I made a comment in the chat, I always have a hard time spelling Dan-splaining. Did I spell it right?
I don't know.
Anyway, since I made a comment, somebody should be able to click on my name there, and
there it is. I see it right there.
Find it.
Yep. So there Dan is. If you're looking at the comments, Dan's right down there in the bottom. Make sure if you're from Beyond the Fundamentals, go check him out. For for anybody named Carol, we endorse everything Dan says. I mean, to the T. We like whole cloth endorse everything that ever comes out of Dan's mouth. You need to know that first.
Yeah.
No, anyway, this has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I know that if we did this on just my channel, and I figured nobody ever would have seen it because I have 37 subscribers.
Yeah, you got a new channel and you're starting out. So yeah, let's Beyond the Fundamentals, folks, jump over there and go subscribe to Dan's channel. And let's get Dan some subscribers and some views, and let's spread around what Dan's got to say. He's a very interesting thinker, Dan, and I enjoy conversing with you, and you make me think, and I will be watching your channel myself.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me here.
Absolutely. It's been fun. Can't wait till next time.
All right.